My guest today is Cameron Cherry, the Vice President and General Manager for Global Public Sector Sales at Intel Corporation. Cameron, always great to catch up. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, Jason. Thank you for the time here. It's always a pleasure.
Let me set just a little bit of context for our discussion today. To many federal technology leaders, the rise of artificial intelligence, and now of course generative AI, will have a significant impact on their mission. This means everything from automating routine tasks to helping mission areas experts accelerate and improve their decision making to advancing research and development more rapidly. As with any technology, agencies need to continually consider the risks, the challenges, the security requirements of AI, and the data it depends on. Striking this balance is never easy. Experts say it requires a systems-level approach that includes both hardware and software, puts security, privacy, and risk mitigation at the center of it all. All these facets of the AI journey has to lead to a responsible and safe use of AI. And of course, that's what we're going to talk about today, Cameron. So how can agencies do that? How can they understand their current and future uses of AI? Well, Cameron Cherry of Intel, let's start there. A lot of agencies are in the middle of their AI strategy. They're writing it, they're developing it, they're starting to implement it. What should they be considering? What should they should keep top of mind?
You know, it's a really good opening salvo, Jason. When I think of this, you hit the nail right on the head. A lot of people are in different aspects of their journey. No one's really at 100%, or there's no right or there's really no wrong. But you started to clue in on the answer a little bit in your opening salvo when we talk about a systems level approach. It's kind of fascinating. What's old is new again, right? So focusing first and foremost on your data. Where is your data? Where is it sitting? What's the data that you want to use that you're going to feed or train models for AI? You know, it's still a burgeoning technology. It's still something that requires a little bit of maturity. And there's still challenges when you look at AI. It has things like hallucinations, just like a human being would. And that's typically happening when it's getting fed contradictory information into the model. And as all things, you have to walk through that. You've got to curate data. So first and foremost, looking at where your data sits. You notice I didn't say cloud and I didn't say on-prem. I just said take a look at where your data assets reside and what's important to you to really execute on the mission. The second aspect, and you started on this too, was that systems level approach. When I said what's old is new again, we have to start focusing back on enterprise architecture. You know, for a little bit of time, with the rise of the advent of the popularity of cloud, which is still very pervasive and a great technological operating model for agencies, it's not so much is it cloud or is it on-prem, it's what do I have in my data assets or my information assets, and where do I need them to best affect the user experience for AI. So enterprise architecture in the world of the civilian space, we had federal enterprise architecture, we had defense architecture. That's going to come into play again. And we have to make sure we not only understand that to do what you talked about, safety and security with AI, but also more importantly, where are we going to stage the data assets and the algorithms to get us the best outcomes. And then I think finally, the biggest thing is not to overthink this challenge set too much. It's just to start with the first step, Jason. It's kind of fascinating. A lot of agencies have started with more user productivity tools, just being able to do data discovery or information discovery in a more easily or readily basis for the mission users. And it's worked out quite successful. You know, in a couple of instances, when you start talking about information retrieval happening in seconds rather than minutes or hours, those types of human savings are really material. So I think those three key things are a good starting point for a lot of agencies. I know we like to have a plan for a plan in the government space, which I certainly appreciate and respect, but in this instance, we get to dabble in a few areas, and I don't want to say fail fast, but learn fast, and then be able to iterate rather quickly into this space safely with AI.
All right, when you said what's old is new again, I had no clue you're going to go into enterprise architecture. Now I'm excited. I'm one of the few people, maybe myself and if you remember Norm Lawrence,
yes, sir.
The first CTO, would get excited about EA enterprise architecture. Why do you think that's so important these days? Is it because that's what's going to tell you where your data is, or the systems that connect your data? Why are we going to talk about enterprise before eyes glaze over? Make it interesting, Cameron.
Sure. Look, when you go to take vacation, you got to know the destination you're traveling to, right? And then you're looking for the most optimal path there because you want to spend most of your joyous time on vacation.
I mean, you don't want to be on an airport and waiting for your flight to happen?
You know, not these days with the delays, no. I love airports and airlines, good customers, but no, not these days. Look, enterprise architecture is a really basic fundamental to understand is, where do my systems reside to buy the best experience or include the best experience for the end user? Because that's really what it's all about. And then being able to know where to stage those assets. If you remember during the rise of the internet, right, we had things called content data distribution networks. Why did they come about? Well, they came about because the architecture and the data was so voluminous. We recognized at that point, to create a richer experience at that time of data consumption, I had to pre-stage things in certain areas around the world. It's the same thing here for agencies, right? They operate globally, they do operate nationally, but if you look at, say, global or consulate affairs or any of these types of agencies that have a global mission, you got to be able to stage data where it matters the most. So just having an architecture or a picture or a general understanding of where the data is going to sit, where the algorithm is going to sit, and what sits between them, because as we wander into the topic of security and safety, that becomes very important.
One would argue, what does it matter where the data sits? It's in the cloud now, right? Most of the data should be in the cloud, or you hope a lot of it is in the cloud. And if it's in the cloud, it's everywhere. It's anywhere, right? It's you don't need to worry about, oh, do I have it in the right data center, or what's the latency to go back to the U.S., to come back to, just to use your example of the State Department Consular Affairs, to someplace in the Far East. So what's the issue here with EA? And then if you are in the cloud, why does the cloud not solve all these problems?
It's a great question. When you talk to, say, companies like Amazon, there's a reason why their shopping cart for global Amazon sits right next to the root of the internet, right? It's performance, right? Data can sit in certain areas, but I think our attitudes today with regards to the modern experience as a user, we want everything instantaneously. So to answer your question more prescriptively, if you think about this for a quick moment, if I say have a data set sitting, say, here in Washington, D.C., but I have a user, let's say, in Africa. The application can't sit in Africa, or the data can't sit here. I have to be able to bring the two close together, but then project the experience forward in an efficient and effective way, because there's a lot of mileage, there's a lot of distance, and unfortunately, Jason, we still haven't solved for being faster than the speed of light. Right. So a little bit of it's a science problem, a little bit of it's just a data management problem or challenge that we're overcoming, but it's all about that user experience. It all has to be grounded there, because that's that real moment of truth where AI becomes effective or just
I could talk about EA all day. But let's talk a little bit about the data piece, because I think agencies have made a ton of progress, I think, over the last, I would say 7-8 years, ever since I think OMB introduced their data strategy and really started to get agencies focused on what your data is, know what it is, where does it reside, what do you have. That's really the key to make AI work. And I think data, we've been going down this path for about 15 or 20 years now about how important data is. Are you seeing, as you talk to your federal customers and seeing in the federal sector, that they have a better grasp of what data they do have? Or again, the volume and the veracity and the velocity is so great, they're having struggles getting their head around it or their arms around it?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, Jason, I'm always a big fan of not only my customers, but my friends that work in government. And they really need to be applauded in this instance. When you look at the advancements we've made in just understanding our data, but more importantly, the publishing of that data that the government's done recently in a very safe, secure manner. You look at some of the assets under, say, the SBA and the Small Business Administration, be able to help entrepreneurs getting access to loans and all these things. I think they've made a monumental step forward in the data. And some of it was thrust upon them. You know, during the pandemic, I'm not sure if many people realize, but the great cyber warriors across the government saw the 300% to 400% increase in the amount of attacks against the data and the information. And you know why we didn't hear about it in the news? Because they defended it, right? So the government has gotten its arms around that. We've got a good cyber posture. We can never always be truly safe, but the vigilance that the government's put into protecting the data set is great, number one. Number two, when we saw, say, when Suzette Kent was the United States CIO, that focus on Cloud Smart, what really underpinned a lot of that was understand your systems, your data, the data cleanup. And that's been monumental. You remember back in the day, Jason, we would have master data management strategies and all these things where enterprise apps were rising, but no one saw the value because there wasn't a true connection between data, information, and then ultimately knowledge, or if we're talking DoD, the situational awareness. So now with that connective tissue of AI requires data to give you this outcome, train algorithms, we're having these aha moments rather quickly. And I think the government should just be commended for what they've done in the data space.
Do you get a sense that because agencies went through this process, mid 2000 teens, 17, 18, 19, where they had to post OPM breach even, okay, what are your high value assets? Know what they are, know where they are, know what's inside them. That then, kind of is the next way, the path towards making AI better, because those are the data you need. That really drives your mission. There's a lot of data, but knowing where your high value assets are, not just to protect them, but to feed into the AI tools. Is that also what's happening today where, oh, I know that, so now I can use it over here too, just in a safe way and secure way?
That's exactly right. And look, you mentioned the OPM breach, you learn from each one of these. You're exactly correct. It's what's the high value data assets I need to train high quality models to get high quality output. And then more importantly, what are the lower quality data assets that I can start to really look at very differently? Do I actually need them on the network? Can I take them into a cold state so that I reduce the footprint of the attack surface? But more importantly, it's the classic WYSIWAG we've always talked about in computer programming. The better quality input I have, the better quality output I'm going to get. And AI is reminding us of that because it's letting us almost look at ourselves in the mirror again and look at this data and this information set and begin to really formulate what is it we're trying to train this new thing to go do for us in a very productive, high quality manner.
Yeah, the garbage in, garbage out matters too. I mean, that's still a key piece.
Yeah.
We're hitting up on a break, but let me just ask you, because I think this leads into the next segment, the use cases piece. A lot of agencies there's more than 700 use cases around government. We saw the AI use case inventory that OMB put up last September, so I'm sure there's well over 1,000 now. What are some of the pieces of a use case that you're starting to see come together? Are agencies trying to swallow the ocean in one bite, or eat the apple and drink the apple? What's the, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, you got it. Eat the elephant in a bite. It's kind of fascinating. Use cases can be a double-edged sword. I commend the government for trying to collect the use cases and bring a corpus of that together so you can understand where am I going to go apply these resources efficiently and effectively. Use cases can also be a fool's errand. Depends on what side you sit on. Where I applaud the government, I applaud everyone that's really applying AI today, is that baby step methodology. When you look at, say, the interaction of constituents or constituent services, call centers, those types of things, being able to lightly dabble in empowering call centers to have higher quality output and material using AI has become very effective, very safe way to do it. So imagine now you call 1-800 Medicaid, right? And you're starting to get information. Having that analyst that you're talking to make that human interaction better for the constituent, and then the agent helping the constituent, because the results they're getting are better and they're dynamic rather than a script. I'm now engaging better as a community. So I think that's really important. Use cases, we're really focused on user enablement at this point. Do I think heavy AI will come into play and all these great things that are fantastical we dream up in Hollywood will occur? Someday. Eventually, someday, some of that will happen. But there's always going to be a human in the loop to help us with that, because it is about augmenting the human experience.
It's a great place to take a break. We'll come back where we'll jump back into those discussions and figure out where the human does fit. In the meantime, we'll take a quick break. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. Well, welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Cameron Cherry, the Vice President and General Manager for Global Public Sector Sales at Intel Corporation. Cameron, before break, we got into the use cases a little bit. One of the big things that agencies need to consider is, okay, where they're applying those use cases. Hey, we're in the United States. They have a set of rules, laws that you have to abide by. But if you're in Canada or Mexico or a country, Japan, those are different sets of rules and laws that you may have to deal with. This is, I think, commonly, you told me previously, sovereign AI. So let's start there, just define it, and then let's talk a little bit more about it.
Sure. It is an emerging topic, so there's really not a high quality answer at this point, Jason, but it is emerging. When you think of sovereign AI, it's really AI constructed to meet the policy and statutory requirements for countries, nations, and governments. And as you know, when we look at a global scale, or if you're in a cloud environment, data boundaries, data provenance, data security all matter, data privacy as well. So being able to build an AI solution in the public sector space becomes a little bit more challenging than, let's say, if you were in the commercial space. Because now what we're talking about doing is we're talking about cloud as an operating model versus a destination. And in that operating model, you now have to very clearly define the operational boundaries of where data is going to sit, what data it's going to access, and the access rights AI will have to that data set on behalf of a sovereign entity. So it becomes a little tricky. Thankfully, as all things, as we talked about with like enterprise architecture in the first segment, you really have to start looking at that boundary set to start building your baseline for sovereign AI.
So you bring up this idea as operating model versus a destination. This is the idea that if my data lives in one country and I'm doing the AI algorithm in another country, that's where things get more challenging. I'm not even sure there's an answer to that, right? The laws could be diametrically opposed or it could be contradictory, and that causes a whole series of challenges.
That's exactly right. So think of this way to think about it. In a cloud provider is incentivized to put you on their common hardware and software wherever they have capacity to host you. What we're talking about in sovereign AI is you want to say now, I want that hardware and software specifically hosted, let's just use the United States as an example, in the continental United States. That data can never leave the continental United States, but I do want to reserve the right to access it from outside the United States. Let's go back to our State Department Consular Affairs. There was an issue I had when I was in a prior role as a chief technology officer where we were actually being exited from a country. Okay, and we had to exit and take all of our sovereign hardware and software and exit that office because it was no longer sovereign U.S. soil in a foreign country within 24 hours. So when you think of it from an AI perspective, that means I now need to take the algorithms, the data sets, and everything else that I was using that was considered sovereign U.S. equipment and pull it out of that country so that I can still control the data set, the algorithm, and what the AI was doing for me to enhance my mission set. So sovereign AI takes on a very fascinating challenge, but also a very interesting discussion when you look at those types of global missions. But it really is about statutory and policy compliance.
So within this concept of sovereign AI, as you said, still very early stages, people are still trying to get their head around it. There's still the underlying pieces of security, privacy, how to use AI, how to use the tools more safely, more securely. What are some of those considerations that you're seeing emerging, or should agencies kind of keep in mind? We know the easy one, be secure with your data, but,
right.
But there's more to that.
There is more to that, but there's some great basic things in hygiene that we've learned from running a lot of information technology assets and systems for many years. As you look at AI, it's this interesting convergence between IT and operational technology. Because if I look at use cases, let's say post office, right? They have sorting machines and sorting centers that have automation associated with them that with augmenting of AI can start preventing, let's say, those machines from doing something unsafe in the sorting centers. And post office has really leaned in a lot of areas. It's kind of fascinating being one of the oldest agencies to do that. So we are talking about this convergence of the two. So basic hygiene, encrypt. Encrypt where you can, encrypt data at rest, encrypt data in motion, use good encryption keys, do things in a more dynamic versus static manner. So those types of basic things matter. The way that you do role-based access to information or account-based access to information, making sure that you're constantly keeping up on your security standards, which a lot of the CMMC standards have driven through NIST and others and the government's adoption of that, but continuing those basic hygiene functions. Because where this is all culminating into, Jason, is AI and an algorithm is going to make a decision at a tactical edge and then return to me a decision function potentially or some sort of output of that algorithm. I have to be confident that no one has altered the algorithm or altered the output in transit. And so when you start to think of that, that's why we come back to EA, your network topology matters. Unfortunately, you can't have AI without having a little bit of a technological discussion, but then how the user accesses safely and securely really does matter.
The data encryption piece, the role-based access, a lot of this, and I'll buzz it up with it was really leaned into that zero trust architecture.
Exactly.
And I think this is why you're seeing this AI rollout, the zero trust rollout at the same time, and say, okay, how do we ensure that the systems we want to use or adding AI capabilities to are secure in and of itself? Do you see a lot of parallels with agencies who are saying, hey, we're comfortable to apply AI to this system and this set of data because we've applied zero trust at the same time? Are you seeing that connection?
We are, and it's fascinating. I'm going to come back to my what's old is new again. When I was a systems administrator, this isn't new. The concepts are similar, and AI, as we know, has been around since the 60s. We just have enough data now to be able to have it make it effective use of it in our daily lives. But as a young systems administrator, we used to create system accounts to allow systems to talk to systems. And we would secure those accounts. AI is exactly the same thing. I have an algorithm that's going to talk to a person. So I need to make sure that connection is safe and secure. And you're exactly right. Agencies that have gotten ahead and have adopted zero trust principles, they've done a very nice job, I would actually say, in starting that journey. Those that are ahead in that, I think, are more safely applying those zero trust principles to AI. And it obviously has a correlation to success and how you deploy it and operationalize it.
It's as soon as you start to kind of go through these kind of concepts, I'm like, oh, that's a pillar. Oh, that's part of that pillar. And then you're starting to make that connection. As the growth of AI continues, are there certain emerging or security considerations that maybe like sovereign AI is a good example of a bigger picture one, but are there other security privacy aspects that you see as the next hurdle for agencies, something that this will be something that a lot more agencies will have to consider in the next 6 months, a year, 2 years?
Yeah, hallucinations are going to become a challenge. And what hallucinations are at their fundamental state is either bad data, misinformation, or disinformation that's trying to alter or change a validated output that you're trying to produce.
And let me just jump in because I think that's a great point. It doesn't have to be done on purpose. It just could mean I put in data and you put in data and you put a period instead of a comma, and that could mess everything up. That's very simple.
Exactly right, or a duplicate record of some sort that one came from a system that you said was an authoritative source and one that came from a secondary system. So AI is trying to rationalize it's the same information or similar information, which one takes precedent and why.
And then the disinformation or misinformation is someone actually going in and changing the information
Deliberate.
To mess things up.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So being able to use more modern progressive software, we work with several companies like Seeker as an example, to be able to bring the hallucination to life, because as you've mentioned, sometimes they're not all nefarious, right? But you want to be able to curate that data faster, more rapidly as you're going through these volumes of information. So I think being able to focus there and cure those hallucinations rather quickly is going to be very advantageous when you start to think of training these models. The other emerging thing, which is fascinating, are the RAG models, or the retrieval models that are allowing the agencies now to not only use open source information, but then very specific enterprise information. So it's enabling the AI algorithm to be more specifically tailored to that mission outcome or the mission of the agency that's out there. And with the advent of RAG models, it's becoming extraordinarily powerful, because now people can ask very prescriptive questions about that mission set and get very tailored answers. So it's a pretty powerful capability that we're seeing emerging.
You bring up open source. There's a push, I think, in government. It's quiet, it's small, but you're starting to see a bigger push for more use of open source. You see it with the intelligence community, but you're also seeing it at a place like CMS, which has open source software development.
Right.
What's the AI open source? Is that a concern for agencies because of, hey, it's open source? When it comes to software development, there's a lot of support of that, but open source information is much different.
It is different. It's fascinating. Open source has always been a double-edged sword. There is a great positive aspect to it because you're leveraging an entire community and ecosystem of bright minds to build great software. There's always the risk when you think of adversaries on the government side of being able to inject things into the software development lifecycle. And there's cons too, right? When you're running an open source DevSecOps shop, you have to have certification and training and maintenance of employees to be able to keep up with it. So there's always a delicate balance. In the models and the information, you're absolutely correct, because obviously the more our adversaries have, the more they can use against us for misinformation or disinformation. So being able to control access and validate some of the users accessing the data is going to be critically important. Age-old problem we've always had, but we have to be more vigilant as we move into that environment moving forward with AI.
Cameron, we've touched upon a ton of different pieces and parts of this AI discussion. The journey agencies are on obviously is never ending. But what are some of those advice considerations? What are some of those potholes? You picked the thing that agencies need to avoid. In the last minute or so we have together, help me understand what's the big takeaway from our conversation?
Yeah. Define your data set, I think, first and foremost. Understand your data boundaries and understand that enterprise architecture, because it creates a blueprint for your success. It's not about the plan for the plan in detail, but it's creating that blueprint, knowing the journey you're on, taking those first baby steps, and through those lessons learned that you're finding, folding them back in rather quickly and be very agile about the process. I think that would be the first bit of advice. The second bit of advice is AI doesn't have to be costly. Right now, there's this association with AI and having to use accelerators and having to use other more advanced, very costly hardware. What we're finding in practicality is, yes, for certain functions. When I have to train models and I need to do things fast, it absolutely requires exquisite hardware. Much to many people's surprise, your existing infrastructure, whether it just be common CPU, has the ability now to be able to run a lot of the production capabilities that we're talking about with AI so that you're getting better scale. I think that'd be the second bit of advice. And the third bit of advice I would offer them is partner with the software ecosystem, as they've always done, as the agencies have always done very well, and choose a great software partner that will help you in this algorithm journey, because it is a journey together. And that's where you're going to unlock the most effective value.
And as we've talked about, it's software, it's hardware, it's all the pieces and parts together. Cameron, I very much enjoyed our conversation. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today, so let me thank my guest. Cameron Cherry is the Vice President and General Manager for Global Public Sector Sales at Intel Corporation. It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search innovation.